After months of teasing us here with a hint of a tariff here and a soupçon of a tariff there, was that too much, Sam?
I loved it.
OK,
Keep
good.
doing what
Donald
you're doing,
Trump
mate.
is finally getting ready to unveil the whole enchilada, including presumably a tariff on enchiladas. So with economists warning of a global recession, what can Australia expect?
Nervous about the looming global trade war? Maybe you haven't heard of its exciting new name.
We have Liberation Day, April 2nd.
Wednesday, it will be Liberation Day.
This is the instrument of your liberation.
This Wednesday, Donald Trump will finally unveil the full extent of the trade tariffs he's been putting in place against America's, let's say, allies.
Many countries have taken advantage of us. Many of them have actually apologized.
So what do we know about which sector is going to be hit? Which countries, how high the costs will go?
We don't know which sector is going to hit, which countries, how high the cost will go.
OK. What we do know is that a report out today reveals part of America's beef with Australia is over beef. Strict biosecurity laws introduced after the 2003 detection of BSE in US cattle banned the stuff from our shores. And that ban could lead to revenge tariffs on our own beef exports. But the PM says he won't weaken biosecurity laws, saying there's too much at stake.
The idea that we would weaken biosecurity laws, as my mum would say, cutting off your nose to spite your face. Not on my watch.
Also on America's list of grievances, Australia's ban on other food products, including pork, poultry and apple and pear?
Apple and pear. That's new to me. Apple and pear is a classic.
Speaking of random clips from American movies, the US is also peeved off about Australia's plan for local content quotas on streaming services, as well as our proposed penalties for platforms like Facebook that don't pay news organisations for content, pharmaceutical patents, and our PBS also on their hit list.
Those issues are not up for negotiation.
I agree with the Prime Minister's position, and if I'm given the great honour of being Prime Minister of this country, I am not going to compromise in relation to issues that are of national significance and importance.
Also being floated, reciprocal tariffs over the GST, which, FYI, is also applied to Australian products. So, as the world nervously awaits Wednesday's announcement, just what can we expect from this Liberation Day?
It won't be so pleasant.
Good to hear. Stephen Hamilton is Assistant Professor of Economics at George Washington University. We've just heard all the tariffs that the US administration might bring in. What do you make of it all?
Yeah, look, something to keep in mind here is, it's not a good idea to do backflips trying to rationalise what the Trump administration does. At the end of the day, I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to shut America off from the world and make America fully self-reliant. And they're looking for any excuse to put tariffs up to do that. So to say, the GST is a trade barrier is crazy. We put GST on Australian domestic producers, we put it on American producers. It's got nothing to do with trade. So, the fact that these things really aren't very credible, I think just says this is not really a credible exercise.
Right, so we should stop worrying about apples and pears. And I guess, what should Albo do then? Like, he's got to cosy up to Trump on the phone, be obsequious and say, I think you're great. And then to the electorate, he's got to say, I'm going to be tough.
Look, to be honest, it's not nice to hear this, but there's not much Albo can do. I don't think there's anything any PM could do. I think if Peter Dutton was the Prime Minister, I think that the outcome would be similar. No world leader has gotten any exemption from the Trump administration to date. I just think you have to ride the wave and do your best not to offend him, but I wouldn't be so hopeful we'll get any kind of exemption from these things.
Well, what would be the impact of more tariffs on the Australian economy?
Look, direct impact is small. So, the steel and aluminium tariffs, for example, that we just saw are something like 0.02% of GDP, right? So, to be honest, in the aggregate scheme of things, we won't notice them. But the indirect impacts are serious. So, if there was a full-on trade war, we could lose a pretty significant, a quarter point off our GDP, which, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's many, many billions of dollars, right? And that is going to be felt. So, I think the other big thing for Australia that we need to think carefully about is the flow-on effect. So if the US contracts as a result of the tariffs, if that has a flow-on effect across the world, then we might see something like a global financial crisis or a global recession, and that certainly will hit Australia and hit Australian jobs as we saw just a couple of years ago.
Stephen, you mentioned some words that caught my interest just before. Global recession. This is scary. Now, each week here I get paid in cash and I put it into a mattress. I request that. Am I doing it right? Am I playing the long game here?
Well, in that circumstance, yes.
Thank you.
But as I often say, economists have predicted 7 of the last 5 recessions. I'm not the guy to ask if a recession is around the corner. It's a possibility. I would say uncertainty has really spiked. We see that in the data very clearly. And I think there is a sense in which people are really worried about what's going to happen. And if consumers are worried, if businesses are worried, they all pull back. And if they all pull back at once, your economy contracts, right? So I think that's the concern, that's the risk. And I think, our policymakers need to have their eyes very closely on that economic outlook.
Stephen, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.